Imagine you come to court for a simple ticket, and see a kid acting like he's here to rewrite the script, not answer for what he did. The morning session in municipal court had that dull, waiting room rhythm. Papers rustled, shoes scraped on old tile, someone coughed into a tissue that had seen better days. The benches smelled of polish and time, the air carried a mix of coffee, perfume, and the faint sting of disinfectant. Then the door swung open, and the noise shifted. He walked in, 22, maybe 23. Tall in a narrow way, shoulders just beginning to learn what adulthood feels like. Dark jeans, white sneakers, a jacket that tried very hard to look casual and expensive at the same time. Hair a little too styled for this room, as if it had been ready for a camera, not a judge. A phone was pressed to his ear. No, the third act drags, he was saying, not bothering to lower his voice. Dad's right, but the notes from Netflix are garbage. No, I'll punch it up tonight. Yeah, I'm literally in court right now, but they always cut my stuff anyway. Several heads turned. A woman with a parking ticket shook hers. A man in work boots let out a quiet, irritated sigh. Up on the bench, Judge Caprio watched, expression neutral, the way you watch a storm cloud that might pass, or might not. The young man slid into place at the podium as his name was called, ending the call with a lazy, "I'll text you the new version." "Good morning," Caprio said. His tone was even, neither warm nor cold. "Morning," the kid replied, like they were stepping into a meeting, not a hearing. The clerk began to read. "You are charged with failure to stop at a clearly posted stop sign and executing an unsafe maneuver, captured on the city's traffic camera." "Your Honor," the young man cut in, raising a hand slightly, "forgive me, but, that line could use work." The room stopped breathing for a second. Caprio's eyebrow edged up. "I beg your pardon." "The way you're reading it," the kid said, completely serious, "it's clunky. Real people don't talk like that. May I suggest an alternative?" Tiny laughs leaked out around the benches. Someone whispered, "Is he out of his mind?" He reached into his jacket, pulled out a small notebook with dog-eared pages, flipped it open as if this was a pitch meeting. "Try this," he said, eyes on his notes. "You rolled through that stop sign like it was a suggestion, not the law, and nearly turned a quiet corner into a stunt scene. That's more natural. Has rhythm." Caprio tilted his head, studying him as though he were a new species. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. The silence stretched long enough for the young man's half-smirk to wobble. "Are you finished?" the judge asked, finally. "For now," the kid replied, though his voice had lost a sliver of its shine. A few quiet chuckles. Someone in the second row muttered, "Hollywood," under their breath. "Let's look at the video," Caprio said. The monitor flickered on. Grainy footage, a quiet intersection, early light, no traffic to speak of. Then, the kid's car entered the frame, a compact sedan, moving faster than it should toward the stop line. It didn't simply roll through. Just before the sign, the car jerked, almost yanked, toward a right turn. Not a smooth curve, not a casual, arrogant swing. More like a sudden pull, as if someone had grabbed the wheel. A low murmur ran through the room. "Freeze that," Caprio said. The still frame showed the car mid-lurch, front end dipping, rear shifting just enough to betray momentum fighting control. The smirk was gone now. The young man's jaw tightened, his fingers curled around the edge of the podium. For the first time since he entered, he seemed to realize there might be more here than a clever line and a scolding he could talk his way around. Caprio studied the screen, then the defendant. His eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger, but in calculation, as if some inner ledger had shifted from attitude problem to something's off. "Interesting," he murmured. And for the first time that morning, the young man who thought he was revising everyone else's dialogue stood there with none of his own ready. "Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below and don't forget to subscribe to this channel." Caprio let the frozen frame linger on the screen for a beat, then nodded to the clerk to stop the playback. "All right," he said, turning back to the defendant. Let's step away from the picture for a moment. Tell me who you are, sir. The young man gave a light, practiced laugh. I'm just a writer's kid, Your Honor. I grew up hearing that if a line lands wrong, you don't argue with it, you rewrite it. A few people smiled despite themselves. Writer's kid? Caprio repeated. Expand on that. My dad's a TV guy, the young man said, rolling the words around like they tasted good. Did a bunch of shows in the 90s, early 2000s. Sitcoms, some dramas. You'd know the titles. He still does notes for studios, punches up scripts. We're in that world. He said it with casual pride, but his fingers picked at the edge of the summons, thumbnail worrying a tiny tear into the paper. So you've been around that business a long time, the judge remarked. Since I was tall enough to steal craft service donuts, he joked. Our house was always full of people in the room. Producers, showrunners. They'd pat me on the head, ask what I thought of scenes. If I said something sounded off, everybody laughed and said, listen to this kid, he gets it. There was a slight glow in his expression as he remembered it, then a shadow as it faded. And outside those rooms? Caprio asked. School. Work. Anything that didn't have a catering table? The young man's gaze flickered away, toward the back wall. I mean, I help on projects, he replied. Run pages. Sit in on meetings. I give feedback. You're employed as a writer, the judge pressed, gently. His tongue darted over his lip. Not officially. Yet. I'm on my way. For now I do runs, drive people, make sure everyone has what they need. It counts. It's part of the pipeline. There was a faint crack in his voice on that last word, so soft you could miss it if you weren't listening closely. In that environment, Caprio said, what happens when you step over a line? The kid's smile stiffened. We're creative, Judge. We don't really have lines. If the idea works, nobody cares who interrupted who. Formalities are flexible. So you're accustomed, Caprio summarized, to skipping formalities. He shrugged, quick and defensive. In our circles, yeah. People don't get hung up on rules. We're making stories, not filling out forms. Someone in the back let out a low, that sounded a lot like disapproval. Has there ever been a time, the judge asked, when you were personally held to account for something you did? Where you couldn't talk your way around it, or have someone else smooth it over? The question landed harder than the others. For a moment, the young man didn't answer. His throat moved as he swallowed. When he spoke, his tone had lost some of its polish. Not really, he admitted. If I messed up, Dad called someone. Or a producer joked it away. I'd get a lecture, but then we went back to notes, to punch-ups. It never stuck. A few heads in the gallery nodded knowingly. Others exchanged looks that said, that explains a lot. And on the road? Caprio asked. Have there been other incidents with your driving? The kid shifted his weight, one foot angling toward the exit before he caught himself. I've had a couple of warnings, he said. How many is a couple? A pause. 3. Murmurs fluttered through the room like wings. For what? The judge asked. Rolling stops. Quick lane changes, he said. They said I was assertive. I figured I was just efficient. I'm always shuttling between studios, you can't crawl through town or you miss half your meetings. And how were those matters resolved? Caprio's tone stayed mild, but the question left no room to wriggle. The young man exhaled slowly. My father made calls. A friend at a network knew somebody. It went away. As the truth came out, his shoulders seemed to shrink a little, as if the expensive jacket had grown too big for him. You understand, the judge said quietly, that what you call confidence can feel like arrogance to everyone else in this room. The kid opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again. Behind the bravado, something raw flickered, the look of someone terrified that without the famous last name, there might be nothing impressive left. "I'm just trying to be useful," he said, softer now. "If I'm not fixing things, if I'm not improving something, I don't know what I am." In the benches, an older woman stopped frowning. A man in a cap lowered his arms from their crossed position. They might not like his attitude, but they recognized the fear hiding underneath it. Caprio watched him, seeing not just the swagger, but the scaffolding propping it up. "We're not in a writer's room here," he said. "You can't rewrite reality. Out there," he nodded toward the image of the intersection, "your choices have weight." The young man shifted his eyes toward the frozen frame of his car jerking at the stop sign, and for the first time, he seemed to grasp that this wasn't a scene he could punch up with a better line. Caprio nodded toward the monitor again. "Let's return to the video," he said. "Something isn't sitting right." The clerk rewound the footage, this time slowing the frame rate. The grainy streetlights flickered over the pavement, elongating every shadow. The room leaned in with him, even the air felt quieter, like the courthouse itself was listening. The sedan approached the stop sign again. But now, in slow motion, the movement looked even stranger. The car didn't drift lazily into a turn, it jerked, as if the steering wheel had snapped out of the driver's hands. The front tires skidded a fraction of an inch, kicking up a faint puff of dust the camera barely caught. Caprio narrowed his eyes. "That is not the behavior of a driver ignoring a sign," he said. "That looks forced." The young man swallowed, gaze pinned to the screen. A small pulse beat at his temple. "You said you were alone," Caprio continued. "I was," the kid answered too quickly, the words tumbling out like loose change. "Totally alone. Solo trip. Just me and the car." From the benches came a low murmur, the kind that says we've all heard that tone before. Caprio didn't react outwardly, but something subtle in his posture shifted, the tilt of his head, the slight pause before he spoke. "Let's watch again." He motioned to the clerk. The footage rolled once more, but this time the judge leaned in close, eyes narrowed in concentration. After a few seconds he pointed to the right side of the frame. "There," he said. "Pause." The clerk froze the video. The passenger seat was dark, but not uniformly. For a split second, before the car jerked, a faint mass shifted. Not a shadow cast by the dashboard. Something with shape. Density. Movement. Caprio tapped the screen lightly. "What is that?" The young man's throat tightened. His hand crept toward his pocket, then stopped, as if even his instincts weren't sure whether to flee or defend. "That's nothing," he said. "Reflections. Cameras distort. These city cameras are ancient." Someone in the back muttered, "These excuses are ancient." Before Caprio could respond, a hand rose from the front row, an officer who had been quiet until now. "Yes?" the judge asked. "Your Honor," the officer said, standing, "I was near that intersection the morning of the incident. When the car passed me, I thought I saw movement on the passenger side. Not clear, but enough to catch my eye." A rustle tore through the courtroom, sharp, like fabric being pulled. "You're saying," Caprio clarified, "there was another person in the vehicle?" "I can't swear to it," the officer replied. "But I did see a second silhouette when the car sped by." The young man's face drained a shade. "It was early," he insisted. "The sun was at a weird angle. Maybe it was my bag. I keep a big backpack." Caprio held up a hand. "Play it again." The clerk zoomed in, pixel by pixel. The image blurred, refocused, then steadied. The moment of the swerve approached, and at the precise instant before the wheels jerked, something unmistakable happened. A hand, pale, slender, shot out from the right side of the frame, fingers stretching toward the steering wheel. The gallery reacted in a hushed uproar. A man whispered, "Oh, boy." A woman muttered, "He's done." Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz louder. Caprio's voice, when it came, was soft but unyielding. "Sir, who was in that seat?" The young man's breathing quickened. He ran a hand through his hair, disrupting the careful styling that had walked into the courtroom with him. The mask of confidence he'd worn all morning began to slip, showing something rawer beneath, panic edging into the corners. "That wasn't. I mean," he blinked rapidly, trying to gather his thoughts as they scattered. "You're misreading the angle. Cameras can invent shapes." "No camera invents a hand," Caprio said gently. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The truth was already spreading like ink through water. The kid opened his notebook again, as if he could rewrite the moment itself. "Okay, maybe the framing is misleading," he stammered. "We can recontextualize." But he was no longer rewriting dialogue. He was trying to rewrite reality, and every sentence unraveled faster than the one before it. Someone in the back whispered, "This just stopped being about driving." And the entire room could feel it. The turn he made that morning had a story behind it, and whatever it was no longer small, or harmless, or clever. It was something he had been trying very hard to hide. Caprio didn't raise his voice, he didn't need to. The firmness in his tone was enough. "I believe," he said, "we need to understand who reached for that wheel." The young man's Adam's apple bobbed once, sharply. "Your Honor, seriously, it's an optical illusion. Those cameras distort." Caprio lifted a finger. The officer at the wall stepped forward immediately, as if he'd been waiting for that signal all along. "Bring in the witness," the judge said. A hush washed through the courtroom. Chairs creaked. Someone whispered, "Witness." Another murmured, "He said he was alone." The door in the back opened. And a boy, thin, awkward, maybe 13, stepped inside. He had the same dark hair, the same sharp eyebrows, the same nervous attempt at looking braver than he felt. His backpack straps were twisted in his fists, knuckles white. The gallery reacted with a collective inhale. Caprio spoke gently. "Son, come forward." The boy approached the podium, eyes flicking between the judge and his older brother. The young man's posture collapsed a little, shoulders not arrogant now, but tense, frightened. "State your name," Caprio said. "Eli," the boy whispered. "I'm his brother." A wave of murmurs rolled through the room. Caprio nodded. "Eli, can you tell us what happened in that car?" The boy swallowed. Looked at his brother. Then at the floor. And finally at the judge, forcing out the truth in a trembling voice. "I asked if I could try the turn. I just wanted to see what the wheel felt like. He said it wasn't a big deal. Just for a second." He paused, breath shuddering. "And then the car jerked. And he told me to hide when the officer pulled us over. He said if they saw me, it'd get worse." The reaction from the gallery was instant, gasps, groans, a stunned silence that settled like weight on the room. The older brother's face cracked open, no arrogance left, no bravado. Just fear and shame. "I didn't want him in trouble," he burst out, voice rough. "Everything always falls on me, okay? Dad already thinks I screw up everything I touch. I wasn't gonna let him think that about Eli too." Caprio let him speak. Let the rawness spill out, unfiltered for the first time. He wasn't supposed to be with me," the young man continued. "I wasn't even supposed to have the car. It's my dad's. He keeps it locked, but I know where the spare key is. I just wanted to take Eli out, clear my head, talk. Dad's been difficult lately." The truth landed heavier than the lies ever had. So this wasn't a cocky kid rewriting the world to fit his ego. This was a scared older brother improvising excuses as fast as life collapsed around him. The room's tone shifted, ironical smirks dissolving into something quieter, more human. A few people looked away, as if witnessing something too personal. Caprio leaned slightly forward, voice still calm but sharp as a scalpel. "So," he said, "you took your father's car without permission." You drove with your younger brother beside you. He grabbed the wheel. You hid him. And then you lied. The young man couldn't lift his head. Yes, Your Honor. No notebook. No lines. No edits. Just truth, trembling and unpolished. Eli wiped his nose with a sleeve, tears gathering. And the older brother's face, strangely, looked younger than his brother's for a moment, stripped of all the swagger he'd worn like borrowed armor. Caprio regarded them both, the room holding its breath for whatever would come next. The hearing, once a comedy of arrogance, had crossed into its point of no return. Caprio let the silence linger just long enough for the weight of the boy's confession to settle. Then he nodded to the officer. I'd like the full report, he said. Everything documented from the scene. The officer stepped forward with a folder thick enough to make the young man flinch. Caprio opened it slowly, skimming the pages with a methodical calm that felt almost surgical. All right, the judge murmured. Let's walk through this. He turned the first page toward himself. According to the inspection, Caprio read, the vehicle's stabilization system was malfunctioning. A low ripple rolled through the benches. Specifically, the judge continued, the car had an intermittent failure in its electronic stability control, something that would absolutely cause a sudden pull during a turn. He looked up at the older brother. So when you told me the movement wasn't normal, he said, you weren't entirely lying. The young man nodded weakly, relief and dread mixing on his face. Eli clutched his backpack straps tighter. Caprio flipped another page. Here, he went on, tapping the text. The technician who inspected the car noted this issue had been present for months. The vehicle should have been taken in immediately. He shifted his gaze back to the young man. Your father knew about this? A long beat. He knew something was wrong, the young man admitted. But he pushed the repairs off. Said he'd get to it. And I didn't want to bother him about it. So you took a car with a known fault, Caprio summarized, added a 13-year-old passenger, and let him reach for the wheel. The boy's eyes filled. His brother squeezed the podium, jaw tight. I didn't let him, the older one said, voice cracking. He asked. I should have said no. I know. But he wanted to try it, just a little turn. And I thought I could hold the wheel steady if anything happened. And then the stabilizer failed, Caprio finished, and the turn became a lurch. The young man lowered his head. Yes, Your Honor. Caprio didn't scold. Didn't sigh. He simply turned one more page. Now, he said quietly, let's talk about those previous warnings. The gallery leaned forward collectively, sensing something shifting again. The judge scanned the notes, his expression tightening. 3 separate incidents, he read. Reckless turns. Abrupt lane changes. A near collision. He looked at the young man. You said these were your mistakes. The young man nodded automatically, the way someone nods when they've repeated a lie so many times it no longer feels like one. Caprio tapped the folder again. But the officer's notes add something interesting. He paused. In each of those incidents, the officer reported seeing movement. A second shape. A quick shift toward the steering wheel. The older brother froze. Eli looked down, shame flooding his cheeks. A soft, almost sorrowful murmur spread through the benches. You took the blame, Caprio said slowly, for your brother's actions. The young man blinked hard. He's a kid, Your Honor. He gets excited. He always wants to try what I do. And I'm supposed to look out for him. Dad loses it if either of us messes up. I didn't want Eli yelled at. Or grounded. Or worse. And your father, Caprio asked evenly, was never told the truth? No, the young man said. Never. He still believes you were the reckless one. A tiny nod. He thinks I'm just, irresponsible, the young man whispered. A screw-up. So I figured, what's one more thing on me? Better me than Eli. Caprio closed the folder, not abruptly, but with a deliberate, quiet finality. The courtroom had gone utterly still. The mood had shifted once again, this time into something deeply human, painfully familiar to anyone who'd ever protected a sibling with more heart than judgment. A woman in the third row dabbed her eyes with a tissue. A man in work boots exhaled softly, shaking his head with a sympathetic sorrow. This was no longer the arrogant critic with a script notebook. This was a young man crushed between guilt, loyalty, and a fear of failing the only family he knew how to shield. Caprio studied him, and for the first time, there was unmistakable warmth beneath the stern professionalism. "You've been rewriting life," he said gently, "to make your brother look innocent." The young man's chest hitched. "And in doing so," Caprio continued, "you made yourself look guilty." The words weren't an accusation. They were the truth finally fitting into place, after months of evasions, edits, improvisations, and self-inflicted blame. For the first time all morning, the young man didn't try to argue. He simply stood there, head lowered, a hand trembling at his side, no bravado left to hide behind. And for the first time, the courtroom wasn't laughing. It was waiting. Because the story had shifted again, and now everyone wanted to see where the judge would steer it next. Caprio rested his hands on the bench, as if grounding himself before stepping into the final stretch of the truth. The older brother stood rigid, shoulders practically touching his ears, while Eli hovered beside him, eyes glossy, guilt tightening every muscle in his face. The gallery was silent in a way that didn't feel like a courtroom anymore. It felt like a family's living room right before someone finally says what everyone else has been afraid to say. Caprio's voice was calm, but carried a depth that made the young man look up despite himself. "Your father," the judge began, "does he know you've been covering for your brother?" The young man exhaled, barely audible. "No, Your Honor." "And why not?" "Because," the word hung, stretching thin. "Because he already thinks I'm a disappointment. If he knew Eli was making mistakes too, he'd think he failed with both of us. I can handle being the one he's upset with. I don't want him putting that weight on a kid." Eli's chin quivered. "I didn't mean." "I know," his brother said quickly, voice cracking as he cut him off. "You're just a kid, El. I never wanted you scared of him." Those words, raw, protective, unvarnished, shifted something in the room. Even Caprio let out a slow breath. The judge closed the report folder and leaned back. "Well," he said quietly, "I'm not punishing a child for the mistake of someone older." A stunned stillness swept through the benches. "And I'm not punishing you," Caprio continued, meeting the older brother's eyes, "for loving your sibling more fiercely than you love yourself." The young man's head lowered as if his knees might give out. "But," the judge added, "I am going to intervene. Because love without guidance becomes chaos, and chaos becomes danger. And the roads are not a place for chaos." He turned slightly toward the clerk. "Note the decision." The gallery leaned forward. "The citation is dismissed," Caprio said. "In full." A ripple, half gasp, half sigh, spread through the room. Eli wiped tears with the back of his sleeve. The older brother looked up, stunned, relief and disbelief tangled across his face. "But," Caprio continued, raising a finger before relief turned into celebration, "there will be conditions." The air tightened again. "For you," he said to the young man, "mandatory responsible driving sessions. Not punitive, educational. You will attend them." The young man nodded instantly. "For your brother," Caprio added, turning to Eli, "a safety course designed for adolescents. Supervised. Practical. He needs to understand what a steering wheel means, and the consequences of touching it." Eli swallowed and nodded as well. "And both of you," Caprio said, "will attend a meeting, with your father, in the presence of a social worker." That drew murmurs. The young man stiffened. "Your Honor, I don't want." "That meeting," Caprio said, gently overriding him, "is not punishment. It is an opportunity. Your family has been speaking in half-truths, whispered fears, and rewritten dialogue for far too long. That needs to end. He paused, letting the gravity sink in. Young man, the final conversation in your home should be honest, not invented. A wave of emotion swept through the benches, older spectators nodding, recognizing something of their own lives in those words. The young man's throat worked as he tried to speak, but no sound came. And then Caprio delivered the line that would later make headlines, clipped into videos, reshared across the country. In life, he said softly, the hardest thing to write isn't a script, it's the truth. Because the truth refuses to be rewritten. The young man blinked hard, and for the first time that morning, he let his hands drop from the podium, not in defeat, but in acceptance. Eli reached for his brother's sleeve. The older boy didn't pull away. He didn't hide him. He didn't shield him. They simply stood together. The courtroom stayed silent for a long moment. A silence filled not with judgment, but with understanding, something rare, fragile, and real. Finally, Caprio gave a small nod. You're dismissed. Both of you. And take this moment seriously, it's the first honest scene of your story. As they stepped back from the podium, the gallery watched them go, two brothers walking side by side, carrying less shame and more hope than when they'd entered. It wasn't triumph. It wasn't punishment. It was something better. A turning point neither of them would ever forget.